Hey y'all, what's up? We're live and we're just doing an informal chat. So it's a weekend morning after May Day, and it's a beautiful spring day. So people might be out and about. But if you're tuning in, I'm Wythe Marschall and joined, of course, by Tony Grasso. Tony, what's
That's
up,
me.
man?
Hey, what's going on? I'm excited to kind of get into some of the different Stillfleet 2 visual development works today. It's been a
Yeah,
little bit since we had a working stream like this.
it is, and we thought we'd do more often, and somewhat it is the question of work meetings and actually doing the work and sort of other paying jobs versus hopping on the stream and having fun, which we've been doing a little bit also on the off weeks from the podcast tapings on Monday nights. So Monday nights Eastern we tape Why We Roll, our
Hmm.
podcast with Chris Pickett, and then sometimes we've been doing this Why We Work stream where we kind of invite. Basically friends, fellow game designers, people interested in game design who we know,
Right.
to sort of chat and work together. And you and I and Ethan had been doing an illustration live stream, so this series is kind of a related but different. Hey, let's just hop on and talk updates and talk through really problems or things that we're concerned about or tackling immediately in terms of our
Right.
own practice. So hopefully that's interesting to folks, and we can keep doing them and yeah, that's it. So this stream is going to be, just an hour informal where Tony and I are going to talk about Stillfleet 2, which is the game that we're next working on together,
Hmm.
having just sent to print, actually, this sometimes Kingdom RPGs for Zine by Ethan Goldini, with design by Tony, and some, of course, major help from Sunari Paiwang, my wife, who's our operations lead. And I edited it and helped Ethan write it, but it's really Ethan's baby. And we're working on another zine, Ultra Delve, Zine One by Constantine Paradius. And again, Tony, you and I have helped with some
Yeah.
mechanics. You're doing all the art and design, so that's going to take a little longer. Ethan obviously brought in a bunch of art to us, and we're already working on the next series of zines for that game. But Stillfleet 2 is something we really want to do. It's a bigger question. What should it be? We've had a great discussion with some of our players last weekend. So been thinking about it all week. I know you've written up some thoughts, and I have been thinking kind of nonstop about it, but I haven't, made final calls on some things. And I think one thing we talked about today is actually turning to some visuals because it's just
Right.
video, and showing folks some of your awesome art and thinking about the kind of I think you use the word taxonomy, right? The kind of groupings of aliens and things in the game. And we did this a little
Yeah.
bit before, I believe, with sort of gear, like basics. We talked a
Hmm.
bit about the spacesuits, the envirosuits, we tend to call them, because you're not always in space, but different environments, different worlds that require you to have your
Right.
oxygen. And now I think today we talked about maybe some of the communities. So I think we could even just chat as we go, and I'll shut
Yeah.
up in a second. But these ideas of like a species versus a group of people who are from a planet, but they might be technically they're humans or post-humans. We're not going to get into like reproduction as much as just
Right.
okay, what do you call these different groups? So we were thinking of after a long circular thing, we went sort of back and forth on this as just a group of GMs. But I do think community in the end to me sounds the best because it allows us to play with both, you know, mechanical heritage, different kinds of AI,
Hmm.
and traditional ideas of speciation and sort of bigger organisms where, a blue whale can really only make more blue whales. I mean, how would it even work otherwise? And then, ideas of just communities. So this diaspora of humans, and today the diaspora of wetans. So in the game, they're these big bugs. They're based on actual big bugs called Weta, Weta. You should Google them if you haven't. They're like cat-sized crickets that live in New Zealand. I think they're kind of pretty. They eat carrots apparently. And the Wetans in the game are very, very common. They're sort of the most common species along with humans, and they also experience this diaspora. But instead of humans all originating from Terra, from Earth, the Wetans originate from somewhere that's kind of a mystery, and they have different religious ideas about sort of where their species is from and why there are so many. And we talked about in the past, and I think there are different cool artworks that show this, but that there are different phenotypes, different body forms of the
Right.
Wetans, and we just never really made a final call. The only call that was made officially, canonically, is that Taylor Moore made a call early on that on the planet Cockadoon, RIP, the Wetans are shrimpy. They're more shrimp-like, and redder. They tend to sort of eat this whatever source of protein, algae, stuff from the sea. They're sort of getting like the flamingos. I think they're kind of getting that the color. So I think that was one that someone early on who's not even us, another GM, had a cool idea, and we're like, oh, that's tight. Like maybe the Wetans look kind of different. So I think Tony, you and I were talking before we started going live. What if today we just even started with one community rather, and try to think through some of the changes we're making to powers and to also the look and feel of the game, or not even changes, but things we're sort of explicating. So let me add live and then turn it over to you if you want to kind of maybe zoom in and chat a little about Ethan's work, your work, and kind of where you're thinking of playing around with this particular community, which is probably it's the most common after just generally different kinds of humans in the world of the
Right.
game.
Yeah, so I think right now we can start off. I just did like a search for wetans on my computer, and these are the images I have. I am sure that there are more um, in the various books, but these are the ones I have quick access to at the moment. Two of them I did, and two of them Ethan did. So kind of right down the middle in terms of like different artists, I guess, tackling a sort of similar prompt. And so moving forward. Um, I do think having a clearer vision on yeah, on shape language, on body shape, even in the ones that are shown here, um, I think I probably stuck to them in a specific way, where mine don't really have this big, like long tail bit. I'm sure it has a specific insect name, anatomical name, but mine almost look more cockroach-like. At least this guy does, to some extent, at least in my eyes. Um, and mine are also a bit thinner, I think, where Ethan's are like chunkier and a bit more, almost more organic, I guess, in a sense. So the shapes are a bit looser. Um, I know that one of the conversations we had privately doing some wetland art was to make them like spikier, or at least give them, their bodies a bit more edge.
Yeah,
Um, and so, yeah, I guess moving forward, like you said, how we're kind of we want to set out a couple of maybe distinct. I don't know if you want to set them apart as distinct communities or just that they look different on different places. I guess I'll throw that question back to you just for ultra clarity. Are we trying to aim for, two or three distinct communities of Wetton, or are we trying to say no, Wettons from all over share broadly the same community, even if they looked drastically different from one another, like biologically?
yeah. I mean, in the rules of the game as written, I do think it would be fun to have in the way that where there's different kinds of humans who can get different bonuses based on the planets they grew up on. So Terra is this kind of Mad Max post-apocalypse, and people are kind of more like I don't know, ripped and scary and metal in the
Mm-hmm.
canon of just like the design of the game. And then there's other worlds controlled by the company that are more sort of they're essentially like colonies where the company has set up trade a certain way, and so people might have less access to things than they would on Spindle, the alien space station that's sort of the home base of the company. But also, the company can, in some ways, help them live more secure lives than on Terra, where there's sort of different competing species and different sort of groups of humans who aren't allied with the company. And just irradiated wastelands and hulking war machines from thousands of years ago and stuff. So I think it's interesting to think about Waytons the same way, where you have Waytons who are on Spindle, and they've been there now in the canon of the game since we're jumping forward some decades, possibly many generations. So they've kind of only lived on this big alien space station.
Oh, jump scare.
There you go. Content warning, real Weta. And I think it's also fun to think about Waytons on these other planets and how they would respond to the maybe different environment. But if they're mostly Earth-like worlds, partially terraformed or fully terraformed, then also largely it's social. It's like how are they getting powers essentially related to their position vis-a-vis the company that goes throughout space and coordinates trade
Right.
across the world. So I think the first step that we did was just break up the Waytons from the most populous planet other than Terra that also has the most Waytons, which is called Kalayat in the game. So there's Kale Waytons from Wetana, the big. They sort of have a little continent, and then the Waytons who are from Spindle, who I'm calling two throughers, meaning people who went through, so went up to space more than two generations ago. So they've pretty much lived their whole life, in space. I had the idea that there'd be more of these groups, but the communities in the core rulebook I was proposing, just like having a limited number, but some options for humans, would be for Waytons, Kale or Wetanan from Wetana, and then two through or people who've been born in space. And the lore I want to condense to like a sentence, right? So it'd just be like your family, your family's been in space for generations versus like your family, you just arrived from this Earth-like world. So
Right.
again, it's not so much about the lore as just like, okay, there's a difference that would, hey, what's up, Taylor Z? Shout out in the chat.
So,
Um, but that would be a difference that would mechanically allow us to play around, and maybe even if we just started there, like coloration, I do imagine a lot of spikes. I definitely imagine them skinny. So I'm seeing sort of a blend in my head because I'm looking at y'all's art, looking at real Weta, and just thinking of my experience as a kid. My favorite species in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2.0 were the Thri-kreen, the like mantis people. And they were drawn in very sort of alien, skinny, but very, very beautiful ways. And as a little kid, like that really left an impression on me, those sketches. And they had all kinds of cool biopunk powers, and this was really like I think those Dark Sun books, that was the setting where the Thri-kreen lived, were like really ahead of their time in terms of biopunk kind of takes off in the 2000s, and this was 10 years earlier.
mhm.
So it definitely left an impression, and for me, Stillfleet is a product of my engagement with biotechnology and medicine and agriculture, and like, okay, how would biotech work if that was like the main way we made things? So I think the Thri-kreen have always stood out, and that's one reason the wetans are like the most common, along with humans, just as like a background thing. So yeah, man, I don't know where we want to start, but that's to set it up. I mean, I have other ideas. The other planets, so there'd be two Threwers on Spindle, the Kale Wetans or Wetanans on Kalayat, who could come to Spindle easily. And then there'd be Wetans from the planet Kalarash, which is the kind of ocean world, and those Wetans had experienced this horrible plague, basically, where they almost died, and they pulled away from the company. And then in the core rulebook timeline, so decades before our new timeline, they had just begun to trade with the company again. So I don't know what they look. There's really no mention of them other than that. Just, oh, there's a bunch of Wetans on Kalarash, but they're on this island to the south west, and they haven't traded with the company much, so it'd be kind of rare if you were like from there, but it's possible. And there's a bunch of other worlds that mention having Wetanas, having places the Wetans live. The other one is Narm, but we've kind of cut off access to Narm in the canon for now.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I don't know if that inspires any thoughts, or you want to talk more about the basic body forms, Tony, and kind of how you get going with like alien species design, and especially in the context of game design, where you're gonna have to do it. I remember having this conversation with Ethan years ago. It's like, dude, you have to do it a bunch of times, right? You can't just draw one badass drawing. Like, it has to be something you feel
Yeah.
comfortable. And I know we had this conversation about horses too, and like, yeah, let's
Uh-huh.
not do medieval stuff because nobody likes trying horses. But
Right.
do you want to say a little about your process as an artist, maybe?
Yeah, no, so that definitely comes up, and that is part of why I kind of wanted to get into this today, is because they're so prevalent and because they're kind of one of the more staple things, like imagery wise, that we kind of pull on for being Stillfletian. Um, I was feeling in the organization and in the way that we were like moving forward. Like, well, I guess I don't really know if I had to like nail down some specifics. Um, like they look like big bugs, and they look either more cricket-like or more roach-like or more praying mantis-like, which they shouldn't, right? They should. That's I guess why I brought it up. We should probably figure out like where we want them to actually fall. Look at some of the artwork that exists. Um, and then yeah, there is a large part of it, I guess, from like a concept art or knowing that we're doing like this massive tome of a book, um, or realistically it'll be split up into a couple different books now, but it's like lots and lots and lots of drawings of these guys, and so having kind of shorthand in my mind for how can I make it look like a weapon. Well, at least in the past, we've done this kind of, I don't know, typical. I would say that this is more praying mantis shape, at least coded in my head, of this kind of like weird one. It was how many sides? Almost like a hexagon in a weird way, and then the big eyes, and then that's kind of how we've gone about doing them, almost no matter the artist. Um, and then giving them six appendages, two upper arms, and then variable shapes of lower legs, um, has been part of it as well. It came up specifically when we were messing with envirosuit design, where you and I were kind of going back and forth on, I guess, how standardized are the spacesuits, the enviro suits. Realistically, would they be they would be form fitting, but if they have such a different, I guess, body makeup than humans, they would necessarily need to be shaped quite differently. And even as I'm sketching it now, I'm sketching like this guy up in the corner, like these guys, at least the ones that you pointed out, have like tiny little beady, scary eyes. I guess in contrast to how we've been drawing the wetans with these like larger, to me, praying mantis shaped eyes. Even as
Yeah.
inspiration, I know that the mantids are separate, but visual inspiration wise, to me, they read sort of like a cross. I don't know for you as the person that kind of conceived of these various concepts, and now I'm just kind of ingesting them and trying to actualize them. If you feel like that is a uh, like an apt distinction, or one that you're like, nah, just give them the big eyes because they look better.
Yeah, well, I think there's two things. One is like evolution. If they even if they really were Wetans, like Weta, who became more or less bipedal and so well, sapient is the main thing, but also like larger, just physically a lot larger and bipedal, so more
Right.
humanoid because there's only so many ways. So if you're standing up, even if your knees locked differently or something, like you have to distribute weight a certain way and have a gait that's different than when you're on six legs, which is how all these bugs are actually sort of horizontal, more like a dog or a cat, right? Even though they have six
Mm-hmm.
legs and they can go upside down and all kinds of cool shit. So they're distributing weight differently. So I think the vision can be related to that in that it's all of a piece of like you're surveying your environment and what do you do all day. So Weta, actual Weta are more like cows. I mean they're eating plants. So they don't have the predator vision, whereas mantids are more like humans. So all the different kinds of mantises are like waiting around for prey and then killing them, and they have really good binocular vision for that. So I guess it's that question like in the lore of the game, they're supposed to be omnivorous like humans. They're basically a lot like humans, but they can eat. Like one of the jokes is they can eat anything compared to a human. So they can eat like trash, and they think it tastes interesting and complex and whatever. They have a much better sense of taste and smell than humans. And they're not described as like horribly predatory or anything like that. But then again, are humans horribly predatory? So it's a question of why we have the vision that we have compared to say again a cow or a sheep, right? So there's this bifurcation of like carnivores and why do I guess early mammals like end up with these different lineages, like this sort of dog cat lineage, and then you get at some point from that there's a branching off toward the monkeys and apes, and we're apes, and even though we're not like apes aren't out there hunting, we do have the the good vision, right? And that's something that I think happens later in human evolution, if I recall, when the humans have sort of branched off from the other apes. So all I'm saying is it's quite possible that they are sort of basically Weta-like organisms, whether they were from Earth or some other alien planet, but they were big grassy eating insects, and then later they like get upright, and for various reasons they have to like look around whatever, they get bigger eyes. So we could keep the big eyes, but I'm also not, I don't mind if it's a smaller retcon. Like I think if they look totally different, that's weird, but if we draw them a little differently,
Right.
and maybe this is also a question for other artists, but does anyone mind? And I think that's kind of an interesting question that's come up before. We've talked about like the Klingon problem, like when Star Trek retconned how Klingons look, and they're like very common, in the
Yeah.
first version of the show, and then the second version of the show they look totally different. They're also very common, and you're like, bro, what happened? So, I like the big eyes personally, and I think it makes sense that if you get to be, because in the game they're described as really tall. They're very tall and skinny compared to humans. So the average Wayton is like 7 feet tall. The average human still, um, around 6 feet, depending on your gravity. Um, so I think that maybe having the binocular vision makes sense for that reason, that justification. And the other thing to remember is they are aliens. I think that's a more basic question of like, well, how much are they really like Weta, or how much are they actually from Earth? And even so, if millions of years potentially have passed, does it matter, right? Um,
Right.
I think that's a different kind of question, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on this, if you care. But I do think these are the kinds of lore questions I don't feel like I want to have a game that's very highly dependent on there being a right answer, and it's more of a vibes based. Like I said, I don't want retcons where if you had the old book and you got the new smaller one, because again the core rule book's big, that's the tome, and what we're doing now is a much smaller core rules book, right?
Right.
That is updated. So I think if you got that book, I want it to sort of look good. Like it makes sense with the old book. It's just saying, okay, some rules have been changed in part because we've set the timeline forward, and that's on purpose, and here's why. And then here's the game. So yeah, I don't know if you have thoughts on that, like how much you want to change it, and how much you think changing the look of a whole species is like a weird flex that's going to trip people up versus like I also love the hamburger Tony versus something that that's natural, whatever. Because I recognize, they did originally, and I think that's largely me again from my childhood with other artists a long time ago drawing Thrycreen or just things that look cool. And I think predators
Mm-hmm.
do look kind of cool. Like if you think of them, you don't usually buy shirts that have like cows eating grass. You buy shirts with a wolf or a
Right.
tiger, and I think there's something about that that's baked into human culture that is probably, and I'm not saying this without, I'd have to look it up as an anthropologist to do the research, but it's probably across species that more people are kind of have this almost animistic like relationship with predators and with things that are very safe and they're not going to kill you. You might love them in a different way, but you don't sort of fear and respect them in that almost like godlike. Wow, they're truly a mirror to the human, another kind
Right.
of killer. So I think it's a question of wetans becoming omnivorous and very sapient, and they act like humans. They organize themselves in essentially tribes that fight each other, and then later they have this national problem of the company shows up, and then they have to sort of either organize or become beholden to the company. And in this version, right, they are the kind of stand-in for the people who don't organize. They don't resist the company's imperialism, and they just become, they kind of have to do whatever the company wants, right? So I don't know if you have thoughts on any of that. I'm just kind of rambling.
Yeah, no, I guess I have two kind of standout opinions. I guess three. I don't think it would be I don't think we should go the route of entirely um redesigning I think what a common weapon looks like. I think that there is like an association, even if these two here between me and Ethan have, um, a fair amount of dissimilarity. I think that there's enough in common with the way that wetens have been depicted in the existing material, that we probably should largely keep the big eyes. And if we move towards one body shape or the other, um, even there, I think that people would be able to pick up the core rulebook, the CRB1, and come away into the next series of books for SF2 and not be confused. That's probably the goal. The goal would be to streamline it, and if people go, okay, they just look a little bit different, or at the very least, they made a distinction, which I think is more what I would want to do between the different communities of Wetton. So if there is a community, or if there was a version of Wetton where they were you know uh, they were off doing their own thing for long enough that they do have the tiny beady eyes, then maybe that's a route to go. I kind of agree that I'm more okay with there not being a hard answer, or like a step by step for this is every point in the evolutionary track, or specifically where they I guess originated.
Yeah, we
um
could we could we could give them. Taylor Z points out, like maybe it's cool to give players these options. Like, do you have the big eyes or the little eyes, which are both phenotypes, as opposed to humans who generally have the same
that's true.
eye. But maybe in Waytons, they can basically sense the world the same because they have a chemoelectric sense. So they have like an extra sense compared to humans anyway. So it's not like it doesn't necessarily change their scores, but maybe there's a bonus one way or the other. So it's a species power thing. That's a possibility. The other would be just, okay, which group, like, are the eyes getting smaller on Spindle because it's artificially lighted, or the vice versa? Did the eyes get bigger for the tooth throwers? And mostly we've been drawing the Waytons on Spindle who have the big eyes, but actually on the Earth-like worlds with the strength of a sun, a soul, they would be smaller. You know what I mean?
Right. I think I like that. If we found like these almost have like a District 90 shaped head that I've kind of fallen into, um, which I guess leads into, if we wanted to have some of them look more shrimpy, What are the ways where we would want them to be more shrimpy? But I think I do like there being like 90% of them kind of looks broadly the same. But like I either, I think tying it to where you spent, where your community, or I don't know, would it be part of the same community, but you would have different shaped eyes? I guess is what Taylor is suggesting, which I think is fine. I guess I'm just asking for clarification. Or would that not be an instance where we would say, well, they're different, and they're different because of these reasons, or are they different enough to be considered a different community?
Yeah, I'd have to think through. I think it would be interesting, but it's not how we've been describing Wayton so far. If there were a community where they had a lot of control over their individual like genetic expression, and you could sort of choose to have different traits.
Right.
That's like a cool biopunk thing that isn't really in the game. I think there's like bioengineering and cybernetics and stuff, but I think to me it was coming across more as that it would just be two different communities. But if it was one community that could choose these options, I think that would have to be we'd have to think a little bit like how does that become commonplace to where an individual worker is like I'm gonna get the mini eye enhancement that lets me somehow get
Right.
some other bonus. Um, so I think that's a good question to sort of noodle on. But yeah, I would lean toward in this case maybe different communities, and then maybe there's another community, not Wayton's, where we or group of communities, right? Different group of beings where they have this kind of level of control. I mean, again, void elves would come to mind, or any of the advanced aliens, where if you can play as them, or any of the golem, molgolem, like the sort of fungus people, where their bodies are, they're able to sort of spore and branch off, and they're more fungal. I think with Waytons, they're probably more like humans, so that they sort of have fairly distinct body plans that tend to look similar, even if there's different coloration and levels of spikes and stuff.
I forgot what my other point was going to be, but um, yeah, I think I agree.
We have some questions in the chat, so I can try to address real quick. So, like Waytons and post Waytons, I think the idea is we're just using Waytons for all of them. They wouldn't have speciated again if it's only been a couple decades. So this wouldn't be like. I do think the game is strong in part because of the hard SF, regardless of how much we say. So the goal with the new core book is not to necessarily say a lot of this, but still, I think in the design, what we're doing now, it should make sense, right? So in my mind, it's like, well, they're not they haven't speciated, right? And that's like a hard, clear decision. Um, so they're still like Waytons from different worlds, just like there's humans from different worlds. There's been a diaspora, but it's been recent enough where they've lost track, just like the humans, because of the dark forest, right? Somehow aliens, somebody's kept them in the dark. So there is a diaspora, but they're not able to travel world to world. It's only the company who has Spindle that can do that. So I don't think there's a question of sort of them being post Waytons. I think we're just calling them all Waytons, just like we're calling all the humans in the game are called post humans because they are canonically like they're kind of meant to be like, well, they are kind of fucked up and weird looking and have different features. So I think that's just a language choice. And then Taylor, I'm just going to read this out. Used to work with an entomologist who studied high altitude grasshoppers who are smaller, have a bigger jump, and have regulated spiracles, the breathing holes, but are part of the same community as those below the tree line. So yeah, there can be these big phenotypic differences. So I think that could be a thing where, yeah, again, the size, like one simple one, again, is like, and I don't know, Tony, how hard this is to draw in scale in a game book where we often don't have full scenes, but are the two through Waytons smaller or bigger? And do they have, in my mind, they had like duller coloration. Maybe they do have slightly smaller eyes, and the ones on Worth Like Worlds have bigger eyes, brighter colors, and maybe are taller or something. So there's a difference in
Mm-hmm.
sort of squatness, and those are things that we can begin to kind of play with in different settings. But it would probably require you to develop that kind of cartooning of like the quick hand. Like, how do I know that I'm going to start drawing the two through or the like you have to start just the two through or the Kale like Watanan, version of the same playable species. So I don't know if that.
No, that I think that's a lot of fun, like to think about, and it's a cool challenge to have. If not because I don't think it. Now that I think it's challenging to design, I guess two different things. I guess uh, broadly, but I think the real challenge is having that read in a book as what I'm intending it to. and whether or not we explicitly lay out or do like a little diagram that's like, this is what this is, and this guy is smaller because of this. Or can we have that read with less, I guess, specific language, which would be, I don't know, in some ways preferable to me, if only because I think it would mean that the designs were more successful and that it is conveying the things we're trying to convey, I guess, without having to explicitly like lay them out. But I do think that it's a cool idea to have them. It's something that I think is cool about the existing CRB, that there are different shapes and sizes of various things. I think ascribing some amount of reason to that is probably going to be good, or at least there's something for people to read into there. While having all kinds of different shapes and looks for everybody is meaningful on its own right. When I'm going about designing them, beyond wanting this guy to be a little bit bigger or smaller, I think having a reasoning behind it will inform, will make the artwork feel a little bit more intentional, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you're bringing up attention also in the game from the core rulebook on, which is we really wanted it to feel like you don't have to learn. Like there's lore because lore is fun to write, and it's informing that feeling of like, oh, these people put in research so that everything kind of makes sense and works together. But I don't actually need to know the why. I could just start playing. That's the goal. And in this version, we want to really foreground the just start playing part.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we want to lose the like, wait, they thought deeply about this. That's still the case, but we want to even more sort of minimize that or put that in maybe another book or other design documents or something. And then the game book is just like procedures of play, right? Like here's the rules. So I do think there's a tension between the deep thought and what I think of. I always say is like a kind of one pillar of the game is the hard sci-fi, the hard SF approach of like how would it really work, regardless of how goofy the outcome. You know what I mean? And the themes are serious. The kind of play, because it's an adventure game, kind of goofy, you know. So there's other tensions, but there's this core tension between the hard SF and then the idea of like anti-canon, the idea that, well, the canon is largely there to help build a narrative structure quickly so everyone can kind of agree, okay, what kind of world is this? And other than that, I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can make up stuff. The whole original idea, which again, going back to my childhood and like Planescape, right, was my favorite setting in D&D because you can go anywhere. So it's that idea, Spindle's an alien space station that can connect to any Earth-like world or any sufficiently advanced, human habitable spaceship. And it probably has, and it was set up by the good aliens who, who knows who they are, to help humans and wetans kind of explore, possibly survive, this dangerous cosmos, where otherwise, if they're just building their own civilizations, they tend to get attacked by dangerous aliens. And so that very simple premise lets you then say, I'm going to make up a new world. And my world, they are wetans, and they look like blah. They look like sort of jelly see-through, and they have what look like cucumbers for fingers or so, I don't know. So it's kind of like that everything everywhere all at once idea of like, you could always just like, okay, but if you go 5 degrees to the left, in reality, here, what does it look like?
Right.
So I think there's a tension between the book feeling like there's a through line, and visually there's a through line of like, oh, that's what wetans look like, or oh, there's two kinds, and they look like A when they're from place A, B when they're from place B, and then there's the anti-canon thing of like, I can do whatever I want, which of course we want to encourage, and people to some degree will do that, but again, it is like kind of, we have to take a stance as creators, I think, especially if we're going to spend a bunch of time on it, and say what is normal, right? Is it more anti-canon? Is it more, how much are we, because you could draw it probably differently every single time on purpose too, which is a different kind of challenge.
Right.
But to me, that really that breaks the sort of logic of like the hard SF thing of like, well, who are these people? The way, you know what I mean? Like if you wanted to know more about them, some players seem to get into this shit. So I want to kind of offer everybody everything, which is always hard.
Yeah. Some of it I think is a matter of, I think there's different ways in the writing, and I think the artwork comes in tandem with that, but I think there's different ways in the writing to encourage that kind of like take this and like remix it. Like this is just a version of like what's possible. Like if we have a kind of a set out way that we've kind of agreed that we're going to do, this kind of weapon, I think there is some value in the text somewhere, having it be more of to be more open to say like, this is just a version that archivists or our best possible attempt to recreate like what we've been told or what we've seen. But there's dozens of different ways that these beings can look. These are the ones in the book. The ones that we're depicting are just the ones that have been cataloged. And in that way, I think it gives kind of express permission to uh, make them made out of jelly or to have cat's paws rather than like bug hands, if that's what people wanted to do with it, right? And I feel like maybe that at the front of the book where we do kind of like what is a game stuff, that maybe that's an important part, time or space to point out like you know it's like however many millions of years in the future, it's okay if you have your bug aliens look a little different than our bug aliens. Or rather, if anything, encourage it. Like we want you to find ways to make your bug aliens look, unique and fit the game that you are trying to play.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It doesn't mean, I mean, we should still make a choice visually, but I
I
do
agree.
agree that
Yeah.
it should be something we can write out and relatively in simple terms, so that it's not like oh, this isn't some complicated point. You don't need to like know a lot to follow what we're laying down. That yeah, we're going to represent things a certain way, but also, you know, not just in general do whatever you want. It's an imagination game, but also specifically in this game, it is like effectively endless cosmos, and
Right.
the effective endlessness of it means that you can kind of keep adding and changing stuff. And I think that's a really good point to kind of underline. And maybe just explain why. Like, I do think some of it is just finding really fast language to say like why we're doing the things we're doing, and then why we encourage other people to do whatever they want. And that's that. It's not sort of good or bad. It's more like, in order to give you examples of how this narrative structure works really well, here's kind of how we approached it. But like, again, we really encourage you to tell your own stories. So I think we're on the same page there. I think, what do I think? We still should probably make a core call about some of these things: big eyes, small eyes, height, color, spikes, vis-a-vis the wetans. And if we only have two main groups right now, living in space or living on Earth-like planets, I think that's simple enough to kind of break those up and say, yeah, the ones from Cockatoon remain more shrimpy, whatever that means, shrimp-like. Maybe they have more segments on their back, sort of chitin. So
Okay.
yeah, I think that's a simple kind of, yeah, as you're doing like kind of simple matrix, right? And then we can always get more complicated or weird, but that gives you something to do as an artist between the two. Assuming we're going this plan, if there's sort of multiple kinds of humans, and then in the new core rules there's at least two kinds of wetans, and it's implied, yeah, make up your own, right? So I think that's fun. Another way we could always break our own rules. We could have it, there's one spread on wetans, and it is like much more of a mix and match. Maybe that's more where Taylor Z was suggesting, and some of the questions Bean's asking about wetans and post wetans, it's like maybe there is more of a menu option, unlike the other species, where we're trying to keep it shorter. Maybe the wetans, instead of having multiple single page options, it's just like, here's a bunch of things that wetans can look like, because there's a bunch of kinds on different worlds. That would be fun.
Yeah, I'm not entirely opposed to that. I think that would be a fun way to present them. I think if anything, that would double down on the kind of customizability of play, of the way that we kind of want people to interact. And then even in that though, we would end up like there'd be a lot of different, like, I guess, shapes and things that you could kind of Lego piece onto your desired Waiton. Um, but we'd still end up with um, I guess, core visual principles where it's like, well, they always have six like appendages. They always have two sets of upper arms. Whatever. There's probably a specific word for how the bug legs are jointed on the lower extremities. So we'd still end up finding like specific ways that these look wetting, but big eyes, small eyes, huge mandibles, smaller antenna, et cetera, et cetera. I think those things would be fun for a player and for me to design. I think depending on how how we laid it out, like my mind immediately goes to making like a really fun like diagram where you just roll up a random like you get to do like an avatar creation, uh, for your little wetting guy. Where okay, my eyes are really big, my mandibles are really small, I got stripes instead of splotches, that kind of thing. Whether people are interested in that or not, I don't know. But I think that would be a way to encourage the kind of like secondary ownership that we want people to feel over the game world.
Yeah. And maybe it's the quick build thing, kind of like we do with the classes now, where we have kind of like if you wanted to just quickly pick something, and also pregens and having more playbook style looking spreads for information like that. Maybe this is a similar thing where we have like two through and Kale, Urwaytanen are like, here's just the powers you would pick if you wanted to build that sort of general middle of the line, like middle of the bell curve distribution of traits, in terms of the amount of spikes and eyes and whatever else that apparently there's a wider range of the distribution of those traits with wetans as opposed to humans, where like we don't have generally funky like you know variations in sort of like eye size or something like that,
Right.
skin, whatever. So I think that's an interesting kind of like an interesting way to sort of present the information, and it does raise the question of the other species, the other communities as well, and how much we want to do that. But at least even if we started with Waytons having that more of a vibe, maybe the provincial humans again for more social reasons in terms of the stuff they bonus items or whatever they're getting, because they're from different worlds and they have different relationships to the company. But that's a similar one where it's just like taking that initial, I think it's 3 pages in the CRB, and making it one spread with very clear like types of options, and then you just do whatever you want with those powers. You just pick whatever two you want.
Mm-hmm.
That feels like a pretty fast way. So again, it actually, as I'm saying this out loud, it sounds more and more like a PBTA style playbook, which is something you and I have talked about. Is like, is that what we want? And doesn't that kind of make sense actually? Like, is that kind of where we're going with some of this stuff? It's not a one and done playbook. It's like pick a class playbook and a species playbook, but then so it's a two and done. It's not much more complicated.
Right.
It's coming from that same idea of you just kind of can pick stuff. Granted, what we just said, if we break it up into sort of you have to pick sub options, then it's less fast. So some of it is the question of speed versus, you know,
Right.
giving players like total control. I don't know
Right.
if you have any thoughts on any of that. Yeah.
No, especially I think the real distinction would be at the point where we mechanicalize the difference between the two. I think if it's something that's purely aesthetic, I think that's the way we could go. I think we would both probably err on the side of it. Maybe it should be a more meaningful decision to make. If it's going to impact some of the role play, of where you specifically came from, or where people at least deem you to be from based on how you look. Um, I think that is like an interesting choice for players to make. Um, if they're going to look drastically different, if it is a matter of people will see the weapon with small eyes and have assumptions, or get information, I guess, just based on that solely alone. I guess I'll throw it back to you quickly. Is that something that we want to mechanicalize? Is like, well, if you have this rough body shape of weapon, here are some of the benefits and drawbacks. If you have this rough body shape of weapon, XYZ.
Um, well, I mean, I already have the draft rules for the two like species as sketched out, as the two communities of Wayton, that I described. So that's where I was
Mm-hmm.
starting with, was like, okay, if you're a two through Wayton who grew up on Spindle versus Kaylee Wayton who grew up on Kalayat and came to Spindle. And those powers are largely social, but they could be, we could swap some out. So if again that was the idea of each being kind of a set, more of that playbook thing. Um, if we have the whole menu, then I think that's a little different, and
Right.
maybe the power names then describe. I definitely agree. Everything should be a hard move. I mean, there shouldn't be powers that are just cosmetic. It's not a At that point, it's not a power. So I don't think there's any. I don't think we're going to go down that route. I think all the powers are going to remain Stillfleet style powers. The idea of trying to make sure they're um, in this version, making them more quick to parse mechanically, and then maybe the name does a lot of the lifting if it's like you're from this planet, okay, here's the actual
Right.
names right after that. So it's sort of no lore there. It's just you don't know what that planet means. That's fine. We doesn't matter, right? You don't have to know a lot to get going. So I think there's again, we have some design choices that will play out no matter what. But I think, yeah, right now it's kind of a question of a couple of two or more set options for you're waiting from this place or you're waiting from that place versus this kind of menu idea, which was not how I initially was designing the species. But I'm realizing it's kind of like the provincial humans would probably still be a spread to give that sense of like different, Earth like worlds, which again is, if you think about a game like Coriolis or any of the big sci-fi games, Dune even, there are like different worlds where people have different stuff because the worlds have different kind of um, raw materials available and different cultures of like primary production and then sort of layers of culture on top of that. So I think this is not too different. It's just, oh right, if we want the Wetans to be kind of equal with the humans, we need to treat them that way, in terms of the amount of pages and the way that we're presenting that information.
Right.
So it's probably should be one or the other. Is what I guess where I'm saying is whatever we pick, I would probably like it to be either, your choice of community is just you pick a thing, or if you have to kind of go a little deeper and look at a menu, that at least maybe that's only humans and Wetans for now in the core rules, and maybe other game books again have that for other. Okay, this is the book about Gelasti, so they're going to do a whole spread on Gelasti. But
Yeah.
for this book, it's just like everything else is pick one. But for Wetans or humans, that's like, all right, you gotta like they're everywhere. So who do you want to be, right? That makes
Yeah, and I
sense.
think it's fine if they kind of get singled out because they are focused on more than some of the other ones, or the most any other like kind of alien, being that is featured. I do think in moving forward, it would be fun to explore that stuff, or even, I mean, honestly, that's good like game jam material for people to mess with if they wanted to kind of dive into, um, doing some kind of personal canon, bits for Gelasti, or for the what are the flying monkeys, the Harajun.
Yeah, the
um,
Harajun who suffered the Chrono Plague and their planet is wasting away in time, and so they all had to move to space. Yeah, normal tropes like that.
Of course. But I think if, I think it's cool if in the way that we set up, I guess the canon is we're really only focusing on the Wetans and the humans having this level of, I guess, focus from us as creators. And then if people want to, again, to as part of the jam or just in their own games, can like kind of follow suit, and do their own thing. I think that's a cool way to move forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be a cool thing to highlight in the jam is how much of this could be pretty directly made either if people care. I mean, it could be quote unquote official, or we could co-promote it as like, hey, you should pick up this scene someone wrote, whether it's free or paid or whatever, because it works really well with where we're headed with our next big project. And then yeah, I mean it'd be fun to just see also sort of in a way people voting through their design, or even just discussing this stuff with us as they do something else, but as they're thinking about the system and how they want to organize powers. And we've talked about the strengths and weaknesses, and this might be a time to touch on that came up last week in our chat on the Discord, which if anyone wants, they can check out discord.stillfleet.com, and we're trying to have more regular discussions. I mean, this is really a question of scheduling about like, oh shit, what kind of games should we make, and how do people use stuff? But it came up this question of lightness and bloat or crunch, and I think to me it's I'm coming from the Powered by the Apocalypse tradition of the actual dice rolling is extremely simple and remains extremely simple. You only use the powers when you're doing a hard move, to use Aaron King's term, which is really useful, I think, for the whole industry. Which is you're changing the narrative, right? It's a power where like things are going to change. And Stillfleet is, I say medium crunch because it is actually kind of in the middle of that and an earlier tradition of D&D or Traveler of like, there are some powers that are like, I'm really good at fighting. In this circumstance, I can do double damage or something, which is a crunchy numbers thing and not a immediate narrative change. Although it could be if you immediately kill the enemy spy or whatever in one hit, which has that very actual spy movie thing, versus like the more D&D slog of fighting, which I've wanted to avoid. I don't know that Stillfleet 1 completely avoids. So that's combat is a whole other question of like really making it more narrative. But I think generally the powers are meant to be sort of interesting enough where narratively they're doing something, whether it's completely rethrowing the scene PBTA style, or it's more like that. It's like, oh, you do double damage, you probably are going to have a pretty big impact on what happens next when you use that power. So they are written out in more depth, and they have that sort of descriptive in the original version emphasis on like all the use cases. We talked about in this version maybe trying to keep it lighter, where we don't go into every use case and we let GMs, we trust more GMs to figure it out. We know the system a little better. We can maybe write them in such a way where that's clear. So I think that's fair. Like I'm like, okay, fair. We can try to write it more simply, but I think the idea is the same, where the dice rolling remains really simple across all the games. I don't think any of us want to have complex epicyclic, okay, my strength is 17, but that means I get a +3, but this DC is 17 or it's like,
Right.
I think we want simple numbers, and we want them to be fast to adjudicate, so what happens in terms of task resolution. And then I think for power design, I still like the narrative powers, and it's just a question of how long is a narrative power, how long is a hard move that is fun. And for this game specifically, because this is probably the crunchiest game in a certain way, like Danse Macabre I think is more crunchy to play combat wise, but Stillfleet has this kind of level of these if this then that sort of weird, are you using the health science or using nanotech. It has like different kinds of stuff in the world, and it's meant to model, and this is on purpose, it was meant to model like everything in sci-fi. It's meant to be like you could do your sort of near future expanse spy arcs, and you can also do Warhammer 40k, space demons from another dimension, Lovecraftian monsters, and it's all through the lens of the struggle between the workers and the capitalists. But the powers are written to sort of be in every sci-fi universe, and I think that's where, to me, a lot of that crunch or whatever comes in, is the powers just having to sometimes, like if it was a game like Fist, which is an awesome game, it's a really cool, I would say, action movie game, but it's sort of near future sci-fi in terms of how a lot of the powers are written. It sort of implies like, you have sort of cool advanced spy tech and stuff, but the powers tend to be short. But I think it's because it's set clearly around now, or maybe it's the near future or something. And I think with Stillfleet, the fact it's set in the super futures, what I've called it, and it's a super future that can be more or less kind of hard SF, Lovecraftian, biopunk goop mode, whatever. More alien, more focused on humans, as we're hearing from Worlds Beyond Number. They're very focused on that Asimovian, like just humans and the struggle of humans and AI, and the very present, right, story there. So because you can do different things with it, which is a strength, it also means maybe the powers have been written variously by me and by others, in different tones, or whatever is the right word. I don't know if I'm if expressing that clearly, but I do think the new core rules should be a little more streamlined and aligned, not to limit anyone, but to just make it faster for new players to be like, I got you. Okay, it's far future. There's aliens in this one. I guess I could ignore them if I wanted, but we're going to keep going with the alien stuff. We like drawing aliens, right? So, yeah. So that's, we have a question from Justin in the chat. So first, I always feel like Burning Grip powers is like I'm taking the reins, which I appreciate. Everyone having a finite portion of their collective narrative weight. I like that personally. I think the system works as is, and we're just trying to make it a little better. So in that sense, we are streamlining, we're moving the narrative ahead. But that is, I think that's a good, description of the goal, right? The goal is for everyone to have a big epic portion of the collective narrative weight, and it's not just the GM or can the fighter kill the Minotaur or whatever, right? It's not like about that. It's everyone being able to do hard moves when they want, and being able to use grit to just make normal rolls into hard moves, to use that language, right? So that's another way I might explain it, is like, you don't have to even use your powers if you burn a lot of grit on a check. And that can be the difference between life and death. And we've seen that as recently as, the last time I played was last Thursday. We played Ultra Delve, and there were people who were like, at the end, it's like, oh shit, I burned 12 grit on this because I really don't want to die. I want to save everyone and get away from the lobstrosities or whatever. So, yeah, that is still the goal. So I think that's gonna, again, I don't think we're throwing out the whole system. It's just a question of what gets streamlined, how the powers are written. Why did I bring this up? Something you said, Tony, that was smart about, talking about wetans. But yeah, I do think, just to underline it, I don't think any powers would be cosmetic. They would all be kind of bigger ones, and it's really a question of how do we collect them and present them, and write them in such a way that it's just really fast for players who may be new to the system to get in. That's our kind of ultimate dream, right?
Right.
And I think it sounds like you and I are aligning on, okay, wetans to humans could have a little bit of a different spread, because they're sort of the most common workers for the company, right? So, sorry,
Right. And
you might have other things you want to go back to. I've probably started
no,
rambling.
no, I think that's all right. And I do think, um, I do think part of, I guess, to kind of try and wrap it together a little bit, I do think part of doing the streamlining and part of the conversations that we're having today around like how do we want to make them distinct, and I guess how much like menu fiddling do we want people to do at default versus like you could I think that's one of the strengths of the grid system games is that people don't have to um, do very in-depth like menu selecting to get a powerful cool character at base. I think people that read all 600 powers that are across the various books and kind of min-max their way to play a very specific character, I think is great. I think that's part of the intention. But I also think that moving into SF2, one of our goals, and I guess correct me if I'm wrong, is that we want people that have never played the grid system before, or have never really played TTRPGs before, can open it up and have that be just a bit more streamlined via playbooks, via having it kind of set up across one or two spreads. You're like, I want to play a weapon, cool. I'm going to go to that spread, and by the end of the time I read that spread, I should be able to walk away and play a character. Would I be better off if I read the list of powers and the list of powers later in the book and kind of compare and figure out what specific menu options I really really want? Yeah, maybe. But I think by default, I think getting people to start playing as soon as possible um, is a strength of some other games that are, to me, not as well put together mechanically, but like vibe wise, they feel simpler, even if they aren't, simply because they can get you playing earlier. So I think streamlining some of these choices down into quick builds or into something that I sent you internally with more like checkboxes, where it's like these are the couple of things that I'm going to do. It's all in one spread. I know what kind of weighting I'm going to be, and I'm off. Like after this, I
Yeah.
can just start playing. I think that for me would be an important design goal,
Yeah.
not to lose crunch or not to lose the depth that I think people really enjoy about Stillfleet and about the grid system games at large, which I share. I like that part of Blister Critters, where people can kind of go through a couple of different menus and pick specifically what path they're going to be, what kind of animal they're going to be. Um, but because I think the nature of sci-fi at large, especially the way that we've set up Stillfleet or the way you've set up Stillfleet, I think if we can find ways to minimize the perceived crunch, is probably smart on our end.
Yeah, and again, yeah, this goes back to like what is quote unquote crunch or whatever. But
Right.
I tend to agree. I mean, that's like Justin's saying about Pathfinder and Starfinder, aka Mathfinder, right? Is bad. Also, like Eclipse Phase, beautiful game, came out before Stillfleet, and I remember getting that and being like, on the one hand, this is rad. On the other hand, like it's so crunchy. It's got like so many scores and stuff. And even task resolution, as we were talking, going back and forth with players about this, like with Mothership, like is more complicated to do anything. So yeah, the powers, there's no powers. It's not like you have to read words. So Stillfleet might be more appealing to people who like reading more, but it's simpler in the dice rolling than
Mm-hmm.
Mothership, where Mothership is more complicated. But yes, there aren't these narrative powers. So it's really coming from that old tradition of D&D and Traveller. This game is coming from the Apocalypse world, narrative tradition, right? If you had to break games down along this simple bifurcation, maybe you could add in story games as like a third new thing that's developed that is influencing us, but more slowly because I'm old. But I think to your point, yeah, I don't think we want to lose all the like the crunch can come in, and maybe this is to some degree what people are saying in the comments from the grit burning and the rolling, and maybe the narrative powers can be simplified enough where they're just faster to read literally, so that more people can read more of them and feel like similar to when you look at a playbook for a PBTA game, you can kind of quickly read through the powers, the moves, and say, okay, these are the moves I want. Check them. So to your point, your point about the um, making it them actual playbooks with checkboxes, like even if we don't end up going that way completely, it's a good design exercise, I think. So this is
Right.
something that from you and me live talking about, like, what is this game? Just like your live drawing. So again, shout out to Anthony Grasso, Odd Gob Games for drawing cool illustrations of wetans as we talk about what these playable species, these playable communities should look like. We can also talk about design. Maybe we'll come back and do one of these on graphic design, and you could show different character sheets that you're playing around with just to have the conversations, even internally, which may seem like a lot of work. Character sheet design is fiddly. Maybe it sounds like, oh, that's wasted time. But I think for you and me, it's like, no, that's how we're game designing, right? We're game designing to the character sheet because we want players to have fun. To your point, we just want it to be fun. And there are different kinds of fun, but we've excluded. We don't want to do the D&D Math Finder fun. So that's a different thing. You're in the wrong castle if that's what you're looking for. And we know we're not doing full story game mode. So super, super light. We know we have dice, etc. So that's why I keep going back to medium crunch as a good term of like, we know there's rolling and there's some math, but it's really simple. The rolling itself is simple and the math tends to be very simple addition. So I think we'll try to keep in that world. And then obviously the health science at Stillfleet is, again, on purpose. It's complicated because it's supposed to be you're a quantum sorcerer. It's if you choose the wizard like class in this game, sure, it's more complicated. That's your job. But for everybody else, yeah, it should be simple and clear why things are happening. So we will play around with that. I don't mind the idea of showing the playbooks, and we can maybe do that in the next stream if you want, and we can have that discussion, and maybe folks can weigh in. To answer the question in the chat, no, I am not Amber Diceless old. I don't think, I just missed that one. I also think when you're a kid, you play what other kids in your school, or in my case, my older brothers knew about. So I knew about D&D, and then second edition D&D, and then Call of Cthulhu, and then the White Wolf games came out, and that was it. I loved, vampires. So, and then Traveller. I actually discovered the sci-fi games later, which I love sci-fi, so I switched hard to Trinity when I found out Trinity, which was the White Wolf sci-fi game. But Amber Diceless, I'm not sure. So that will have to be another discussion for another time. It's afternoon, at least here on the East Coast. Anthony Grasso, thanks so much for your work with helping us think through as hopefully a group, not just myself, but players and GMs and other people who have stakes in Stillfleet. What is this game going to be? How are the bugs going to look? The player character giant bugs. And thanks to everybody in the chat, Bean and Taylor and Justin and everybody else for kind of saying what's up and asking good questions and having good suggestions. We will come back at you, and we will have draft rules. So if you are in the Discord, again, it's discord.stillfleet.com. You can pop in and say you want to be part of Stillfleet 2.0, and I'll send through some draft rules, and people can weigh in and let me know. I mean, it's going to be a pretty open process like that, at least for a while. We're not paywalling draft rules. And also, if you didn't know, the Grid System Game Jam is going to start in a couple weeks, but it's going to run all summer. So if you're interested in a game jam, we have an SRD. We have licenses for all the games that are commercial permissive. You do whatever you want, basically just throw on a logo. That's another fun one. We're about to announce our guest judges. I think we have 4 more or less confirmed guest judges. So they're going to help read through everything, and we're going to give out some prizes. So it's not just a game jam that's a fun, free thing. It's also like we're going to try to give away stuff. So you can head over to itch.io/jam and find the Grid System Game Jam, or just probably Google Grid System Game Jam. I put the link in the chat. That's about it. Tony, any last shout outs, any thoughts? Give you the last word here.
No, nothing specific. I had a good time sketching these up today. Yep, I don't have any specific notes. I think if I had to pick where we land, it's going to have to be this little guy. I think moving forward, no longer give people the option. If you want to play a bug, this is the space bug you have to play.
Adorbs. You have to play the adorable big grill squat, sort of minion-like bug.
Yeah.
Okay, hard pass. Let's reconvene. And last word, we'll say Taylor says perfect. Bean says his name is Gary. So thanks to nice to meet you, Gary. We'll be back. This is the Stillfleet Studio talking about sci-fi games and game design. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you later.
Later.
Bye-bye.